Hey guys,
Hi guys.
welcome to another Sunday Travel Therapy Mentor live video. This time actually coming to you on Sunday, so that's always a good thing. Tonight we're going to be talking about traveling as an independent contractor. That's a question that we get a ton, and something that I kind of ran the rough calculations of a couple years ago, decided not to go that route. But because of all the questions, I decided to really dive in a lot more deep into the calculations to really look at the difference between the two, either working through a travel company or working as an independent contractor. So we want to highlight some of the pros and cons of doing that, talk about why you might want to try that or not try that, and hopefully shed some light on that for you guys.
Yep, so Jared is going to get our video shared in a few different groups so more people can join on live with us tonight. And I'm going to do some introductions and kind of just recap everything we're going to talk about tonight. So my name is Whitney Aiken.
I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are the faces behind the Travel Therapy Mentor site, as well as our personal blog, Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist. Many of you all might already know us, and we thank those of you that have tuned in with us before, but we know that we might get some new viewers. So we like to always recap kind of who we are and where we're coming at you from. So we are both traveling physical therapists, and through our site and our blog, we kind of mentor other aspiring travel therapists, PTs, OTs, speech therapists, and assistants. And we've been doing this, we've been traveling therapists for 4 years, and we've really been heavy into the mentoring in the last couple of years. So it's been fun, and we share a lot of information, and this is a topic that we see come up again and again. People ask about, have you ever thought about getting outside of the travel therapy companies and being an independent traveler, or negotiating your own contracts? And we've thought a lot about this, so we wanted to share some information from our research and a lot of calculations that Jared has done, because Jared is kind of our math whiz over here. So
I enjoy doing these type of posts. It takes me forever. So I've been working on, so there's going to be a blog post that's going to go with this video that I was going to publish today, but it turned out to take way longer than I anticipated. I think I've been working on it for like 4 or 5 hours, and it's over 3,000 words. So the longest article I've ever written, but it'll be published tomorrow. So we're going to go through some math, some numbers, but it'll be a lot easier to look at that on the actual blog post tomorrow and look at those calculations. So we'll do our best to explain it verbally, but it's a lot easier to look at numbers on paper.
Yep. So that's what we'll be talking about here in a little bit when we get started. But just a little bit more about us. I did say we are traveling physical therapists, and that means that we travel within the U.S. for work. A lot of you guys that are tuning in are probably already familiar with the concept of travel therapy and what that means. Primarily, we talk about traveling within the U.S., so we're talking about U.S. American or U.S. Licensed therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, and those that are taking jobs within the 50 states. Right now, we are actually traveling for fun throughout Europe. We're traveling abroad right now, but we're not traveling for work. We're not working as traveling therapists while we're in Europe. We're just doing it for fun. So right now we're coming at you from Prague in the Czech Republic. We just got here today, and so far we like it a lot. We just came from Krakow, Poland, and we really enjoyed that too. We're super excited to be kind of heading more into Central and Eastern Europe. Western Europe was fun, but it's definitely, the costs are a lot lower and the culture is a lot different in Central to Eastern Europe, so we're excited to see a little bit of that. We've been gone for 9 weeks now, and we'll still be here for another 6 weeks, so it's a long trip, about 4 months. But yeah, we've been keeping up with our weekly videos every week, even while we've been abroad, and we plan to still continue to do that, hopefully be able to bring you guys some valuable information about the travel therapy world. So I see that a few people are signing on with us. If you guys are signing on with us tonight, or even if you're watching later during the replay, we'd love if you would leave us a comment and just say hi and let us know that you tuned in. Let us know who's on. If you have any questions about travel therapy or about independent contracting specifically, we'd love if you would just drop us a question in the comments, and we can try to help answer your question as best we can. Also, if you guys would just drop us a thumbs up or a little heart down at the bottom, we would really appreciate that as well. So we're going to do our best to kind of go over what it is to be an independent contractor, or what it means to do independent contracting as a travel therapist. But do bear in mind that we've never actually done this ourselves. So we've always gone through a travel company, which is the most traditional way to do travel therapy. But we have read a lot about it and talked to some others who have done independent contracting. So we definitely understand the gist of it and want to bring some of that information to you guys today. So again, if you are signing on with us, we'd love if you would just say hey below. I see Jeff is on with us. Hi Jeff, thanks for joining. I know that Jeff and a bunch of the other recent PT grads are getting ready to take the NPTE, the National Board Exam, in a week or so from now. So good luck on that, Jeff, and any other students that might be tuning in. So we want to talk a little bit about, go ahead and hop into what it is to be an independent contractor. And then after we kind of go over the basics, we're going to talk about some pros and cons of why you might choose this route. And Jared's going to give us some examples with some math to show why we think it might be good or not good for certain situations. So what is independent contracting?
So first, let's talk about how it would work as a traditional traveler. You would basically find a job through a travel company. The travel company would, they do a lot of the legwork for you. So they usually present you with job offers. Say you want to work in an outpatient clinic in California, they present you with all the California outpatient job offers, and you could choose from those. So they do that legwork for you. You don't have to find your own contract, which is nice. They also set up the contract for you. They write it out, and then you sign and the facility signs. Usually there's two contracts. So there's one between the facility and the travel company, and then one between the travel company and us. So the facility pays the travel company a set amount, and that's called the bill rate. And usually that is, at least in our experience on the East Coast, somewhere between $55 an hour and maybe like $70 an hour.
And that's for a PT?
That's for a PT, yeah. PT, OT, SLP, I think are usually pretty similar. So then from that, the travel company has to take a percentage to cover all their overhead, cover your half of your employment taxes, cover your health insurance, liability insurance, pay their employees, pay for their buildings, and then also make a profit. So in general, most travel companies will keep somewhere between 20 and 25% of that total bill rate. So the reason most people get interested, and the reason I was interested in trying to travel as an independent contractor, is because if you can cut that 20 or 25% out that the travel company keeps and keep that for yourself, that would be wonderful. So that's kind of the superficial view of it. Like if you could have all that money, then why would you not do it?
Right. So basically, more or less, by definition, being an independent contractor means that you are not going to go through a middleman. You're just going to negotiate your own contracts directly with the facility, whether that's the hospital or a clinic or a skilled nursing facility. This also means that you're going to be a 1099 employee of that facility. So the hospital is going to pay you as a 1099 employee, whereas if you do the traditional route and you work through a travel therapy agency or company, which is what the majority of us do, you are actually a W-2 or a standard employee of the agency. You're never an employee of the facility, the hospital, or the clinic. You're a W-2 employee of the travel therapy agency.
Yeah. So at the end of the year, you would receive, instead of receiving a W-2, you would receive 1099 income, and then you would owe taxes on that. So there's some differences there. I don't know if you guys are familiar with W-2 versus 1099 exactly, but we're going to go through some of the cons of being a 1099 employee.
So first, let's talk about just the pros in general. Why would this be a good thing, and why do people consider it? So the thing is, people think that, or the big idea is that you would make more money.
Yeah, just like I said, if you could keep that extra 20 or 25% of the bill rate, then of course that sounds like an awesome idea. So that is the main pro why you would consider being an independent contractor instead of working through a travel company.
Yeah, and at first glance this sounds pretty straightforward, right? You know, if you're a little bit savvy, you're willing to put in a little bit of extra legwork on the business end and negotiate your own contracts, then you're going to come out ahead at the end, right? That's what you think. Especially
if you have a little bit of experience. So say you've done like 1 or 2 contracts or maybe a whole year of contracts like we did, and then we're like, hey, we know this pretty well. We could reach out to some of these facilities and probably get these same contracts and keep the whole amount. Why would we not do that? So let's talk about some of the cons. And I think this is important and often overlooked. So most people, when they consider that, they just look at the big pro as being make more money. and they don't take into account all the extra costs and all the extra hassle that goes along with finding your own contracts.
Yep. So I think the first thing to consider on the cons list, or we might not even call it a cons list, maybe just a considerations list for you, is you need to establish a business entity in order to do this. You can't just do it as an individual. You have to be basically, isn't it called like a sole proprietor?
Well, you could be a sole proprietor. You can establish an LLC. That's what most people, I think, that go the independent contracting route do, is they'll establish an LLC to, an LLC stands for a limited liability corporation. And basically that just limits your liability. So if something happened and your corporation was sued, they couldn't take any of your personal assets. So a lot of people will choose to go with an LLC or something like that. I honestly am by no means an expert at anything to do with business entities. I've done a little bit of research, but I know very little. So that would be a situation where you definitely want to either consult probably a tax professional would be the best person to talk to, an accountant. But that's definitely a consideration. So you'll have the hassle of setting that up. You'll have the cost of setting that up, and you'll also probably have the cost of an additional cost with an accountant for doing taxes and for setting the whole situation up.
Okay. So the next con or consideration is that you're going to have to do more work. Obviously, you're going to have to do more work in identifying the placements. So you'll have to just search, kind of like if you were searching for a regular job. You might search job boards, Indeed, what else? Just different websites where they advertise jobs, the ABTA website, ASHA
So there's
website.
a few ways you could do it. You're gonna have to find your own contract. So you're not gonna have anyone bringing contracts to you like you would as a travel company, or as if you were working with a travel company. So you could find an area that you want to go to and cold call the clinics in that area and ask if they need someone. Like, say you want to work at outpatient in Denver, Colorado. So you find like 6 or 7 potential clinics, you call them and say, hey, I'm a travel therapist, I want to come to your area, do you have any need for a travel therapist right now?
For short term.
Short term. And most of the time that answer is going to be no, but sometimes it might be yes. So that's one way you could do it. Another way is like Whitney said, you could look on Indeed or Monster or Facebook. People advertise jobs on there, and almost always those are permanent jobs. Sometimes it'll be travel jobs, but if it's a permanent job, you could call the facility about that and say, I know you're looking for a permanent employee. Would you be interested in a temporary traveling therapist until you find a permanent employee? And sometimes they might be willing to do that. It depends on how bad the need is, how desperate they are. So that's a good option. You can sometimes find travel jobs on those websites, and then you could reach out directly to the facility there, and that would be a great situation if you can find that and set it up.
So you could even, a thought I just had was, if somebody like a travel therapy company advertises a job, if they say the facility name, you could try to scoop it out from underneath them and take it yourself. But most of the time, they avoid posting the actual facility name for that reason, because they want you to go through them. They don't want you to know the facility name. They just say the city. Almost
always travel therapy recruiters and companies will not mention the facility names. And the big reason for that is because if you know the facility name, you could set up an interview through a different travel company. That's not in their best interest. So they don't want to tell you the name of a facility before you interview with them through their company.
So the next step after you had to work to find your own facility, your own contract assignment, is you actually have to work on setting up the contract, like setting up the terms of the contract. So you have to negotiate with them how much you want to be paid. You have to negotiate them when your start and end dates are. You have to negotiate all the nooks and crannies and ins and outs that the travel therapy company already has pre-negotiated with them, already has written into a standard contract. Yeah, things like
40-hour guarantee that we always talk about, 30-day cancellation notice. There's a lot of things that go into that, and a lot of legal jargon that the average person is not really familiar with. So you'd either have to try to find some sort of template or just be very careful. Maybe, I know some people probably would consult a lawyer to write out a contract to make sure that it's legal and everything is stated the way that it should be. So there are situations where a facility, especially if it's a big facility like a hospital or a national skilled nursing chain or something like that, they might have some type of contract already that they would just have you sign. But then even in that case, you need to be careful because you need to make sure everything, all the protections are there for you. you need to be familiar with reading a contract or be able to consult with someone that is familiar with reading a contract and making sure that you're not missing anything, because that would be a terrible situation.
Yeah, because just because the hospital has a pre-written contract or whatever, it might not be tailored for a short-term therapist. It might not have all the protections in there. So you need to know what to look for so that you have all the things in there that the travel agency might have pre-negotiated for you if you've done it the traditional route.
Yep.
Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is maintaining, so we're kind of going through, I know a few people have just signed on. Hi Jared, hi Matt, thanks for joining in. For those of you guys who are just signing on, we are talking about some of kind of like the cons or the considerations that you need to look into if you were to choose to go the route of being an independent contractor or a sole proprietor. So the next thing we want to talk about that's kind of on the cons list is you would have to maintain your own insurance, not only your own health insurance, but your own liability insurance.
So this is a big deal. This is one of the main reasons why I just completely, a couple years ago when I started looking into this, before I really even ran all the numbers, I was like, I know the price of health insurance on the marketplace without any subsidies, and I know it's high, and you'd have to make quite a bit to offset that. And so right away, I was pretty skeptical that I would actually end up coming out ahead because of that. So basically, yeah, normally us working as travelers, we're going to take our health insurance through the travel company, and usually it's pretty low cost. The most recent contract we took, we were paying $24 a week for health insurance and dental insurance. So that's very, very low. That's less than $100 a month compared to, I looked it up today, a comparable marketplace plan with health insurance and dental would be $480 a month for me, which would be about $120 a week. So that's a huge difference. That's $100 a week difference right there after taxes that you have to factor in. So liability insurance is another thing that Whitney mentioned, and that's also, but that's so much less expensive than health insurance and dental insurance.
Yeah.
I think liability is usually a couple $100 a year, so that is a factor, but it's a small factor. The health insurance and the dental and stuff like that is the big thing there.
Right, the liability insurance would be just more the hassle of actually having to buy your own liability insurance and make sure to keep your policy up to date and that sort of thing, which is something that's included when you work for a travel company.
Yeah, I've written a few articles about health insurance as a traveler in general. That might be helpful, but most people are going to be going through the marketplace. And when you go through the marketplace, you're just entering your state, whether you're a smoker or not, and your age. And those are the three factors that determine, and your income. And those are the factors that determine how much your policy costs. And even as a fairly young 30-year-old with no past medical history or anything like that, mine is still $400 a month. So the older you get, the higher that goes up. If you're a smoker, it goes up a lot more.
Yeah.
So those things you have to really consider, and you can always get quotes for yourself. But
so isn't the reason why the insurance costs so much less when you go through a big organization is because you're under a group plan?
It's through a group plan, and they also subsidize part of it for you. So they usually pay part of that premium on your behalf. And where you can figure that out is if you stop going through the travel company and they send you information about Cobra, it'll tell you what your premium will be through Cobra, and that is the full premium amount. So you can see when you get those letters about Cobra how much the travel company was paying on your behalf. Mm-hmm. But yes, they can also negotiate lower rates because it's a group plan. Most travel companies have a lot of travelers working for them and employees, and so they can negotiate with the insurance companies and get lower rates. So yeah, it's a big factor.
So we've put that on the cons list, but we're going to talk about at the end, kind of when we come to our conclusions here, is you have to consider each of these factors for your own situation. If you're someone who you know that you already have health insurance, say through a spouse, or say you're young and you're still on your parents' plan, or for whatever reason health insurance is not a factor for you, or say you were only planning on working part-time anyway and you're planning on maintaining your own health insurance anyway, regardless of whether you work through a travel company or not, then maybe that's not a factor for you. But for most people who are going to work a standard 48 to 50 weeks a year, work as a W-2 employee, if you're looking at working as a W-2 employee with the travel agency versus not, you do need to factor in the health insurance.
Yep. So Jeff asked about a typical new grad bill rate, or an average. So it's going to depend on the area of the country. I would say, so first let's talk about new grad bill rate real quick. not every facility is going to have a different bill rate for a new grad and an experienced traveler. Some will, because they realize that a new grad is probably not going to be able to get up to speed as quickly as an experienced traveler and experienced clinician will. I think in general, probably the difference, it's not huge between an experienced traveler and a new grad. If there is a difference, maybe like $5 an hour for the bill rate. But I would say probably an average across the country is for a new grad, if there is a new grad bill rate, it's going to be probably somewhere between $55 an hour and $65 an hour, somewhere in that range. If you're on the West Coast, it might be higher than 65, maybe 70 or 75. But I don't think I've ever seen a bill rate or heard of a bill rate below 55 for a PTOT SLP. And on the East Coast, it doesn't go a whole lot higher than 65 to 70 usually.
Okay, so talking a few more things that you need to factor in if you decide to go the independent contractor route. Another one is paying your own self-employment taxes.
Okay, so self-employment taxes, I would imagine a lot of you guys don't know exactly what that is, because I had no idea a few years ago. It wasn't until I went through this phase where I really got into taxes and like calculating tax rates, effective tax rates, marginal rates, and all that, that I started looking into what exactly self-employment tax is. So self-employment tax, all that is the money that goes on your behalf to Medicare and Social Security. So when you're a W-2 employee, you pay FICA taxes, which is 7.65% of your taxable income, and that is sent to Social Security and Medicare. The employer also pays 7.65%, so they pay exactly half of that amount on your behalf also to Medicare and Social Security. So all that together adds up to 15.3%. When you're working as an independent contractor, there's no employer there to pay that other half for you. So instead of just the 7.65% FICA tax that you pay as a W-2 employee, you would pay 15.3%, and they would call that self-employment tax. So basically the difference is that you're responsible for that additional 7.65% of taxable income going to Social Security and Medicare. So that is something to consider, and it becomes even more important as an independent contractor because your taxable income is higher. So 7.65% of a typical traveler's pay is not that high. If you have a $20 an hour taxable rate, that's not a huge amount. But if you have a $60 or $65 an hour or $70 an hour bill rate, your income's obviously going to be a lot higher. So 7% of that makes, that can end up being a significant amount. So that is a big cost to consider.
Right. So I want to clarify a little bit about what Jared was saying there. So to understand this, you have to kind of understand first how the pay works in general for a travel therapist that works through a travel therapy company. So when you're working through a travel therapy company, they are allowed to pay you an hourly rate that's taxed, and they're allowed to pay you a stipend for meals, housing, and incidentals that is untaxed. So your net amount is higher because only part of your money is taxed. However, if you choose to be an independent contractor and you choose to negotiate your own contracts with the facilities don't pay you an untaxed stipend. They just pay you a flat hourly rate, such as if you were a standard salaried or PRN employee. They're just paying you a flat hourly rate. So just to recap, if you work with a travel therapy company, the facility pays them a bill rate that might be $65 an hour, for example. And when they pay them that amount of money, it's all taxed. But then when they pay it to you, they break it up into these two separate parts, and they only tax one part of it.
As long as you have a tax home, that's a caveat.
If you maintain a proper tax home, which is a topic for a different day, and we have a video and a couple articles about that as well. So if you decide to work as a independent contractor, you cut out the middleman. So now the facility is just paying you the bill rate in essence. They're just paying you the $65 an hour, all taxed. You don't get this untaxed stipend. So how do you benefit from this whole traveling thing? So what happens is at the end of the year, when you go to file your taxes, you can deduct some of your expenses to account for some of that tax-free money like you would have gotten up front from the travel therapy company. But the limitation here is you can only deduct your actual expenses that you actually have evidence for.
Yeah, so this is a little bit complicated, but as a travel therapist, like she said, you get two stipends usually. One is for housing, and that's the bigger one. and then you get a smaller one for meals and incidentals. That's how most travel companies break that up, and usually that will be a weekly amount. And usually, depending on what area of the country you are, us on the East Coast, it's usually somewhere around $1,000 a week that is tax-free. So that could be broken up to say like $650 housing, $350 meals and incidentals, but all that's tax-free. And then the other money is taxed, obviously at a lower rate because it's a lot lower amount than it would have been if all that was taxed.
Right, because it might only be $20 an hour taxable versus the full bill rate of $65 an hour. So you only get paid taxes on $20 an hour versus $65.
Now the great thing about being a traveler, working through a travel company, is that we get these stipends that are to offset the expenses incurred. So basically, as a traveler, you have a tax home and you're traveling away from your tax home to a travel location. And because you're going away from your tax home, you're eligible for these tax-free stipends, right? The cool thing about it, though, is that say you get that $650 per week as a housing stipend, but your housing is only $600 per month. Say you find somewhere on Craigslist room on there for $600 a month. So you're getting reimbursed like $2,400 a month, but you're only paying $600 a month. You still get to keep that amount. That's part of, so as a caveat here, this is all information that I've gotten from consulting with tax professionals. I'm not giving any advice. Make sure that you do your own research on this. But my understanding from looking at the tax laws and consulting with tax professionals is you still get to keep that extra amount that was paid to you as a stipend. When you're an independent contractor, on the other hand, you can only write off housing for the actual expenses incurred. And that's a big deal because in that same situation where you would have gotten $2,400 tax-free for housing, where you're only paying $600 a month for housing, now as an independent contractor, that $600 is all you can write off for housing.
You can't write off the full $2,400.
You can't write off the full $2,400. As far as the meals and incidentals go, my understanding is that you can write that off up to the full rate offered for that. So that would be the same as a regular traveler if you're doing as an independent contractor.
Without having receipts or anything?
Without having receipts or anything. So that $350 that I was talking about, you would still get that. So say in that scenario, you get $350 tax-free. Well, that would be a deduction as an independent contractor that you would deduct off of your taxable income at the end of the year. And then you would subtract that actual expenses incurred for the housing, that $600 that I was talking about.
Right. So we don't want to get into the numbers too much because Jared, like he said, he's in the process of writing a full detailed article so you can see this better in written form. But the moral of the story here is you basically get some extra money tax-free when you work with the travel therapy companies without having to actually show proof of expenses. Whereas if you work as an independent contractor, you can only write off and get tax-free your actual expenses. Yeah,
and that's huge. That is, I think if there was a way to get around that, and I've looked, I don't think there is any way that you can get around that legally. That would change everything. I would be much more inclined to travel as an independent contractor if you were able to take that full housing stipend amount and not just the actual expenses incurred. So we'll go through an example at the end with like actual housing costs and all that, and I'll try to explain it in more detail. But hopefully that makes sense. If that makes sense to you, just say something in the comments. If it doesn't, and you have any questions about that, I can try to
drop
clarify.
an emoji to let us know how you feel about that. And then I'm going to ask you again after we go through the example with numbers, because the numbers get a little complicated. So give us a thumbs up emoji if that made sense. Give us a brain exploding emoji if it didn't make sense.
So one other thing to note about a con or a consideration of traveling as an independent contractor is that you don't have anyone advocating for you in that situation. So you're kind of on your own. You set up your contract like we already talked about, you find your job. When you're actually in the contract, sometimes there's situations where everything goes perfectly. We've been very lucky, I think. We've had a lot of very good contracts that we didn't have any issues. But there are situations where you go work at a facility and things are not what you thought it was going to be. Either the interview, the questions they answered, maybe they lied or they stretched the truth on like what the patient population would be or what your caseload would look like, or a huge range of things that can go wrong with a contract. in the situation of working through a travel company, you have someone to reach out to that can be basically like a lifeline for you, and they can talk to the facility on your behalf, because that's an awkward conversation to have. Some people might feel comfortable going to their manager or to the regional manager and saying, hey, this isn't what I signed up for, but a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, and that's what the recruiter can do for you. So they can advocate on your behalf, and I think that is an important thing, especially as a new traveler.
Yeah. So it's kind of nice. Sometimes it's basically like they're a buffer. They're a buffer for negotiating the contract for you. They're a buffer if you need a scapegoat to help you with a situation that's tricky, if they're not accurate on your productivity, things like that. So sometimes it's nice to have that buffer, to have that go-between person. But some people, if you're really business-minded and you're really experienced and you don't care about that, then that might not be a factor for you. But it is for a lot of people. Yep.
So to recap the cons, the big pro, you should make more money, and we'll get to an example on that to see how much you actually would make more. The cons is that you have to establish a business entity, probably consult a professional on that just to make sure everything is correct. You have to find your own assignments, and then when you find your own assignments, you have to write your own contracts or be proficient at reading the contract that the facility is giving you and making sure everything is right, because you don't have anybody looking over your shoulder there. You're responsible for your own health insurance, so the full premium amount, which is usually significantly higher than through the travel company. In my case, probably about $100 a week higher, $400 a month more. You have liability insurance, not a huge issue, but you have to get your own liability insurance. The travel company usually will provide that for you in almost every case I've ever seen. So you'd have to get your own, a couple $100 a year. Self-employment tax, so that was the big thing. You're gonna have to pay another 7.65% to Medicare and Social Security that normally the employer would pay for you. And then no one there to advocate for you. Those are the big cons, in my opinion. I can't think of...
You can only deduct the actual expenses incurred.
Yeah, you deduct the actual expenses incurred. You don't get the full housing stipend that you would as a traveler through a travel company.
So, if anybody's tuning in right now, if you have any questions, any preliminary questions, we're going to go through an example that Jared kind of came up with. But if you're tuning in right now and you have questions about what we've gone over, about the gist of what it is to be an independent contractor, what are the ins and outs of it, that sort of thing, we'll do our best to answer those questions. If you want to comment below. I see Marcella is signing on. Hi, Marcella. If anybody else is tuning in, we'd love if you'd say hi and let us know, or give us a thumbs up, or let us know that you're there.
And if you have any questions, if you're watching this on the replay later, I know this is not the most convenient time for most people. So if you're watching on the replay later, feel free to ask questions. We'll go back and answer them. #team replay.
Yep. So Jared is going to go through an example. And like he mentioned earlier in the video, he's actually in the process of writing an article that's going to go along with this video that kind of explains everything we've talked about here in written form, which I think is so much easier to understand, especially when it comes to the calculations. So the example that Jared's going to go through is an example of him, and he used some numbers based on our last contract. So I'm going to give you the scenario, and then Jared will talk you through the numbers. So the scenario would be based on Jared's experience at our last contract. A 30-year-old male, working in the state of Virginia, working 48 weeks a year, because most people don't work a full 52.
Yeah, so another thing about that 48 weeks, very few travelers work more than that. One, because people like to take time off, of course. Two, you have to get to the new contract, and sometimes that can be far away. And three, because most tax professionals advise spending 30 days at your home location, which means that's going to be difficult to spend 30 days at home if you don't take at least 4 weeks off. Mm-hmm. So that's why I use that 48 weeks per year.
So we're extrapolating the numbers based off Jared's 13-week contract, but we're pretending that happened if you took 4 13-week contracts or whatever, 48 weeks worth of contracts. That math doesn't quite work out. That we're all exactly the same. So a 30-year-old male in Virginia, working 48 weeks a year, working 40 hours a week. Housing costs is the only major expense we put in here, but of course you're going to have your other expenses. But let's talk about housing expenses.
Well, the housing cost is the only thing that would be different between the two scenarios. That's why I included that in the calculations.
Okay, so for our example, at our last contract, we were paying $800 a month housing, but for Jared's half of that, he's only putting $400 on his expenses. So that's the scenario that this is based on. So Jared's going to compare the amount he made working through a travel company and how that was broken down versus the amount he would have made if he was an independent contractor.
So 2 other factors. Bill rate, we're going to assume is $60 an hour. I don't know what the actual bill rate was on our last contract, but I have had some contracts in the past that were right around $60 an hour. So $60 an hour on the East Coast is fairly common. And then we're going to assume that the travel company is keeping 25% of the total bill rate, which is usually on the higher end, but it just depends on the situation. So we're going to assume that 25%. So in the example of working through a travel company, the $60 an hour bill rate, that after the 25% that the travel company keeps, that would be $45 an hour that ends up going to me as the traveler. And that's going to be broken down into the taxable and the non-taxable, like we talked about earlier. So let's assume that taxable is about $20 an hour, which is a fairly standard amount for a lot of travel companies. So $20 an hour there is going to be taxed, and then $1,000 is stipends, like I talked about earlier. So for housing, meals, and incidentals. So if you break down that $800 a week taxable, subtract taxes from that, you end up with about $642 a week after taxes. And then you add that to the $1,000 stipend, and that would give you a $1,642 a week after tax take-home pay, which is what most recruiters will present to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when they're
that's
presenting
a
a job,
number.
yeah, so that's after taxes. Now, I mentioned earlier my insurance for that contract was $24 a week for medical and dental. So that leaves a net amount after everything of $1,618. Okay? So now, in that same scenario, so that's working through a travel company. Same, everything the same, but let's say I took that same job through the facility directly as an independent contractor. So now I would get the full $60 per hour taxed to me as a 1099 employee. So if we take $60 an hour, multiply it by 40 hours a week, and then multiply that by that 48 weeks per year, we come out with $115,200 gross pay, which sounds like an awesome number to get, right? So then we have meals and incidentals. So I talked about earlier how the meals and incidental, you would still get that even as an independent contractor. You'd still be able to write that off without having to have receipts for those things. And for the Fredericksburg area where we were working, that was $385 per week. So you'd be able to deduct that off of that annual $115,200 number.
You'd be able to deduct it off your taxes when it
at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Then we also we can deduct housing, but actually just the expenses incurred, like we talked about earlier. So that would be, in this example, $400. So $800 between the two of us, split in half. My cost of that housing is $400. So that would be another $4,800 a year that I could deduct at the end of the year as an independent contractor. And then my insurance premium. So like I mentioned earlier as well, health insurance and dental, when I get quotes for myself, if I was not going through a travel company, going through the marketplace, it would cost me about, it was going to be about $120 a week, which is $480 a month. So you can actually deduct those insurance premiums from your taxable income, which that would be another $5,760. That leaves you, after everything with taxes paid on that amount, that will leave you with a net income for the whole year, that 48 weeks, of about $85,000. So then you break that down into a weekly amount, which is $1,773. But then you have to subtract out that insurance, just like I did in the previous example, subtracting out that $24. Now it's $120. So you end up with $1,653 working as an independent contractor after taxes, after insurance, after everything. So to recap those numbers, $1,618 as a therapist working through a travel company versus $1,653 as a therapist working as an independent contractor. So it's only a $35 a week difference after taxes and after insurance. So in that scenario, it's not worth it. And that is the reason why we didn't choose to go to work as independent contractors. $35 a week in that specific Fredericksburg scenario for me. Everyone's scenario is going to be different here, and it's important to run your own numbers and have your own considerations. Maybe your health insurance is way less, or like Whitney said, maybe you can be on a spouse's plan, because that's a big deal. That extra $400 a month, if you can get rid of that, then it might make more sense for you.
Yeah.
But for that scenario, $35 a week extra for all those cons that we listed out is not
all the
worth
extra hassle. So like Jared was talking about, I know all those numbers were kind of complicated to follow, but when we publish the article that kind of has the examples written out, you'll see, and you can kind of, if you want to go back and use his example and plug in example numbers for your own situation to run the scenario to see how it would work out for you, that would be good. But basically in Jared's scenario, what he ran through after considering health insurance and taxes and all these other things, he would have only come out with $35 a week extra for all that extra hassle as an independent contractor. So for us, and for most examples that we've run through in the past, it just does not make sense at all. Again, it might be different for you. A big consideration would be if you didn't have that high health insurance premium, if you were already on a spouse's plan, or if you were already maintaining your own insurance regardless of working with the travel therapy company or not, then those two things would be equal and it might come out more ahead.
A couple other big things that might change the calculations. If your housing expenses are really high. So for us, our housing, we always keep it very low. So that means when you're writing off actual expenses incurred, you don't have much to write off there in deductions at the end of the year. But say we were working in, Seattle or somewhere very expensive, and I was traveling by myself and I had to get a studio apartment that was $2,000 a month. That would change things a lot, because then at the end of the year, instead of having only $4,800 to write off for my housing, I would be able to write off $24,000. So that would drastically reduce the taxes that I would owe. So that is definitely a situation to consider. How much is your housing actually going to cost where you're going to be traveling to? Mm-hmm. Health insurance, housing.
And then the other thing is relocation fees. So in this scenario, we were only working about 4 hours from home. So our relocation fees were basically non-existent. Now, if you are moving all the way across the country and you're factoring in additional expenses can you write off the relocation fees?
You can write off mileage. So if you were traveling, say, from Virginia to California, most travel companies will cap the amount that they'll give you for travel somewhere around $500 or $600. But if you were traveling as an independent contractor, you could write off, I think it's 50 cents or a little bit over 50 cents for each mile that you travel. So say 3,000 mile journey across the country would be, you could write off an extra $1,500 on the taxes. Yeah. So there's other deductions that you can get as an independent contractor. But in my particular situation, in this example, it doesn't make sense. And something else to consider is that the higher the bill rate goes, the less it generally makes sense, I think, to be an independent contractor versus being a traveler. And the reason for that is, as the bill rate goes higher, the taxes owed by the traveler are going to be higher, the independent contractor, versus in the scenario where you're working through a travel company, a lot of times some of that extra money can be added to the stipends, so added to housing. So it depends on what the GSA is, what we go by, how much you're allowed to count for housing per day in the area. But if the bill rate is high enough as a traveler and the area is expensive enough, I guess, where the money can go into the stipends instead of going into your taxable pay, then basically it's like you get that extra money tax-free, whereas the independent contractor would have to pay additional taxes at the higher rate on that money. So the numbers actually get worse as you get up to like a $65 an hour bill rate. I ran the calculations on that, and you actually come out a little bit behind as an independent contractor in that situation.
So my moral of this story is, if you're somebody like me who's not very savvy as far as finances go and business goes, it might seem like a glimpse of an idea for you, but it's probably not realistic. If you're not willing to put in the legwork to, one, figure out if it's even financially feasible for you and consult a tax professional and all that kind of stuff, set up a business entity, maintain your own insurance, all that kind of stuff, probably not feasible. If you are somebody who is very business-minded, has experience maybe from a previous career, or you're really willing to put in the legwork and read up about this stuff, consult a tax professional, that sort of thing, run the scenario, see what you think it would be for you, think about where it is you're going to travel, what your expenses incurred are going to be, and find out if it is feasible for you. But in our opinion, based on the scenarios we've run, for most people, we don't think it is feasible, and it's probably not worth the extra hassle.
And for me particularly, even if it was a lot of hassle, if I could make a significant amount more, I would still do it. I would say that I would draw the line somewhere around probably $150 a week. If I could make more than $150 a week extra as an independent contractor, then I would do it. But if I'm only going to make $50, $75, $100 a week more, I don't think that all those cons that we listed off are worth that extra money. But everyone's situation is different, and maybe it is worth it to you. Hey Ryan, thanks for joining. And Jeff said, this is a very good point, and I actually did not include this in the article, but I should. As an independent contractor, you have to consider that you're basically going to be ineligible for any kind of student loan forgiveness because your payment's going to be way higher. Your adjusted gross income now is going to be, in that example, $86,000 would be your adjusted gross income that you'd have to pay taxes on, or not pay taxes on. You'd have to pay.
Your student loan repayment would be based on?
Yeah, it would be based on that amount. Instead of being in the other scenario where you're working through a travel company, it would be based on like $30,000 a year. So your payment would be way higher. And so for some people, if you're just going to pay that off right away, it doesn't really matter. But if you're planning on going for forgiveness, or you're trying to invest instead of pay down debt like we do, then that would be a very big thing to consider.
Yeah. There's only one other scenario that I wanted to talk about that we have heard about people doing before, and that's sort of working as a direct employee for a hospital or facility with kind of the understanding that it would be on a short-term basis. So if you were to find a facility that would be willing to hire you as a W-2 employee, but with the understanding that you might not be there very long, maybe you don't set exact terms, like you don't call it a travel contract, but you just sign up as an employee of theirs with the understanding you might only be there 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. This might work out for you if you could negotiate it, because then the things with the extra taxes and the business entity and the insurance and all that stuff wouldn't be as much of an issue. So if you just planned on, I'm going to move here for 6 months and just sign up as a regular employee, but I'm not going to stay here very long, and then I'm going to move here for 6 months and so forth, if you could arrange that, that might be okay, and that might work out. But we don't know a lot of companies that would do that.
And in that situation, I don't think that you'd be eligible for any stipends at all, or I don't think you'd even be eligible to deduct any expenses incurred, because it would basically be like you're moving to this new location for this job, even though the understanding is it's only going to be temporary. I'm not certain, but I don't think that would count as a travel contract, meaning that you probably wouldn't be able to get a lot of the benefits of deducting expenses and everything.
So you might make a little bit more if you negotiate that way and try to negotiate a higher wage, but you're not going to make as much as a standard travel therapist.
Yeah.
So this is kind of our take on it. If you guys have questions, if you're watching now or you're watching on the replay, feel free to leave the questions below. But again, we're not experts on this. We have not done this ourselves. We are not tax professionals. This is just based on our research, a lot of calculations and research that Jared has done. So our advice to you guys, if you are interested in looking into this further, Jared's going to write an article about it. You can consult that. But your main thing to do would be consult a tax professional, such as traveltax.com, Joseph Smith, or a similar tax professional to find out if this might be right for you. There's also some other resources. I know there's a guy who blogs about doing independent contracting who is a travel therapist. So if you just Google that, you might be able to find his blog. I don't remember what it's called, but it's called the Independent Travel Therapist or something like that.
Something like that.
So there are some resources out there for you guys to learn more about this. We just wanted to touch base on it because we hear so many people that are just like, this just dawns on them and they just think it's the best idea ever, and like nobody's ever thought of it, and we're like, well, we've thought of it, but it's just not as good as it sounds.
Yeah, it's definitely understandable, because I was in the same boat. I thought it would be a great thing to do, but then there's a lot of hidden things that you don't really consider. But yeah, there's definitely situations where it makes sense. There's certainly people that do it this way, and I assume that they come out ahead. Otherwise, I don't know why they would do it. So So yeah, consider your own situation. Make sure that if you go through with any of this stuff, reach out to professionals, consult. Make sure you have everything, all your I's dotted and T's crossed, so to speak. It's always good to make sure everything's good to go before you jump in.
Right. So thank you guys for joining in. If y'all have gotten any value out of this, if you've learned anything, we would love if you would like the video, leave us a comment, leave us a heart. If there's anybody that you know that is a travel therapist or wants to become a travel therapist and might benefit from learning about this, if you would tag them in the video, that would be really helpful so we can help to spread some knowledge. And it's just good to let other therapists know what types of possibilities are out there for them, because we still meet and talk to people on a daily basis that don't even know anything about travel therapy. They don't know how it works, they don't know anything, so they're just winging it, and they're just like, oh, wonder if I could just do this, or I wonder if I could just do this, and how does it work? So this would be a great video for you to share with your friends, classmates, colleagues that might be considering, oh, maybe I'll just be a short-term travel therapist and I'll just negotiate my own contracts. Let them know about this video so they can learn more about the ins and outs.
And just this page in general, we meet travelers still. Sometimes travelers that have been traveling a long time that have no idea about tax homes, or have no idea about that they're being lowballed like crazy. I've met some travelers that have been traveling for like 2 or 3 years with the same company and they're getting paid way too low. So the reason we started this is just to spread information, try to get as many people as knowledgeable as possible. So yeah,
so if you would tag a friend, share it, like it, all that good stuff. But yeah, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we hope that this was helpful. Let us know if you learned something.
Yep, next week we're planning on doing this again on Sunday. I think we're going to be in Vienna. Vienna, Austria, I think, next week. So same time, same bat channel, and we will see you guys later.
All right, have a good night, guys. Bye.